Good evening. My name is Payton Holmes. I want to share with you a story. This story is, in fact, a recollection of my experiences with a very peculiar case. I fancy that this case contains some of the most elaborate and blisteringly quick work, naturally causing it to be one of the most memorable solved mysteries. Using the techniques of my most influential role model and great-grandfather, Sherlock Holmes, I managed to uncover the truth behind Mr. Goren's gruesome grave. It was over a year ago, February 8th to be exact, when I set my eyes on the breathtaking landscape of Sahali Country Club. The early morning mist was almost fully departed as I found myself shaking hands with golf pro Mike Montgomery. It took me quite some time before I realized the grave look on his face. My thoughts were wandering off elsewhere within the vaults of my mind. "Would that be an acceptable payment, Mr. Holmes?" said Mr. Montgomery. I snapped back to reality, too late to understand what kind of payment Montgomery could be offering. Not that it matters, though. I would never accept compensation for tasks such as this. Just like Sherlock Holmes, the only reward I will find solace in is a closed case. Montgomery pointed me into the direction of the driving range, emphasizing that the entire establishment has been quarantined since the beginning of the month due to the extreme inquiries of the media and the like. Upon reaching the range, I began my observations. Winter sunlight poured over the finely trimmed grass, dewdrops refracting the rays into my sight. It has been a week since Mr. Goren had told his fiancée that he was going to try to get in a quick 9 holes and be back in time for dinner. In that time, the only notable evidence local detectives recovered on the course was a pair of Mr. Goren's uniquely marked golf balls, his shoes, a single sock, and one of his sand wedges. What they could not recover was more astounding. Sahali has gained national attention due to the peculiarity of this case. Not only was Mr. Goren missing, but his power cart and golf bag had vanished as well. Head golf pro Jim Pike knew that his precious golf club's impressive history and strong reputation were in jeopardy. He was aware of my past work, as I had become somewhat of a local legend in criminal business. I had assumed that Mr. Pike would be calling me, so I made arrangements to visit him from my home in Tacoma, arriving at Sahali 2 full days before he possibly could have attained my contact information. The reason I mention this is because in hindsight I calculated that Mr. Pike would have been detained as a prime suspect had I shown up to solve the case merely a day later. The culprit that was behind this whole conundrum was a clever fellow. He knew how to set up Mr. Pike as a suspect, although he did so in such a fashion that led me to catch him. Within 24 hours of stepping foot on the high heavenly grounds of Sahali, Dr. Stephen George was behind bars. Now I'm going to explain to you how I enlightened the Sammamish Police Department. My findings were reactionary thanks to the sacrifices and adaptations I made to mirror my famous ancestors' legacy. By applying his knowledge of logic and deductive reasoning, I was able to piece together every bit of this case. Upon reaching the police department, Police Chief Michelle Bennett and her cabinet were ready to listen to my analysis of the case of Mr. Gore. They were not expecting a solved case in such a small time frame, giving me extreme eagerness to explain my conclusions. Brief examination of Mr. Pike's golf bag he had stored in the bagroom led me to Mr. Goren's missing sock. On the underside of the sock was a faint but recognizable grass stain, one that could be acquired with only a few steps in wet, freshly cut grass. The other sock that was found with the shoes by the pond on the 2nd hole on Sahali's south course had no stains of any kind other than of sweat. One of Mr. Goren's golf balls was recovered in the pond approximately 5 feet from the shore, where the water was 2 to 3 feet deep. I must give credit where credit is due. If Mr. Montgomery hadn't suggested I start at the range at that particular time in the morning, and if the sun failed to show itself, as it quite often does in this area, this case would have taken twice as long to solve. Upon first observing the effects of the grass dew reflection, I noticed a very distant patch of grass near the far end of the range that failed to reflect as much light as its surroundings. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the presence of water on the grass in this small area was quite sparser. You see, dew is formed when a surface is cooled to a temperature in which water condenses at a faster rate than it evaporates, thus forming small droplets. This could only mean that the grass in this particular area was swept clean of dew, or the grass was warmer than its surroundings. I believe in the latter, considering that no footprints in the grass were visible. When a body decomposes, the bacteria that eat it away give off a large amount of heat. For the same reason, large piles of manure are at high risk of busting into flames. This particular grass was being heated by something. This something obviously turned out to be the body of Mr. Goren, laid in a shallow grave that was precisely incised from the grass. He was missing his socks and shoes, and his hands were lightly dusted in pond scum about 2 feet up the cuff. I deduced that Mr. Goren had waded into the water to find his errant ball, but decided to turn back before retrieving it. This is most likely because he had spotted his attacker grabbing a club from his bag. Goren attempted to put his socks and shoes on, but only managed to get a single sock before deciding to run. He only got a dozen or so steps before his life was brutally ended. I then examined the head and found a deep crevice in the back of his head, approximately 3 inches at its largest diameter. The crevice was at a horizontal angle. I stuck my finger inside the opening. To my satisfaction, I pulled out a small clump of muddy grass. This is what sealed the fate of Stephen George. Using one of Mr. Goren's right-handed golf clubs, the culprit used a swinging motion only a left-handed man would use that would cause a near horizontal mark on the head. Dr. George is left-handed. He is also quite jealous of Mr. Goren's success in obtaining his former lover, Cynthia. He also believes in revenge. He also thought it would be a good idea to hide Goren's now disassembled power car and golf bag in his own garage, where I appointed police to immediately after discovering the body. Although an overview, I hope the insight I gave you on this particular case of mine gave you a sense of my abilities. I hope to be just like my great-grandfather one day, maybe even to surpass his accomplishments. This has been a short story by Payton Holmes. Thank you and good day.